We broke the news Monday that 4 migrant boats were intercepted off our coast this week.
Since that time, since President Trump's gotten into office, the southern border obviously has been shut down. So people are going to find other ways.
Like the County Sheriff's Office uncovered what they say is a smuggling operation involving more than 30 people. Several law enforcement agencies worked together after learning a group of men was planning to travel to the Bahamas to pick up illegal drugs and, quote, smuggle undocumented immigrants into the U.S.
Florida's coastline, long celebrated for its beauty, has become a battlefield. In 2025, those waters turned into the front line of America's war against smuggling. Federal agents intercepted 4 migrant boats off Fort Pierce, and what they found shocked even seasoned investigators. On board, 30 Chinese nationals, including 2 children, 5 Bahamian crewmen, and, hidden beneath supplies, 370 pounds of cocaine, 168 kilos, a shipment worth millions, designed to move silently into American cities. This wasn't random. It was organized, deliberate, and global, a pipeline stretching from China through the Bahamas and straight into U.S. waters. A system built to exploit gaps, combining narcotics with human cargo, profit layered over desperation. Authorities say it's one of the most sophisticated smuggling channels uncovered in recent years. The first clues appeared ordinary: an Airbnb in Fort Pierce, men renting rooms, coming and going, nothing unusual, until sheriffs looked closer, until federal task forces connected movements across counties, until surveillance revealed a pattern that didn't fit. What looked like vacation traffic was in fact the command center. Federal task forces began to piece it together. This wasn't leisure, it was logistics. Surveillance teams tracked movements to the marina. From there, the plan unfolded. Boats were prepared to cross into the Bahamas, pick up human cargo and cocaine, then return under the cover of darkness. Sheriff's deputies worked alongside ICE and Homeland Security, comparing timelines, matching names, connecting bank transfers to suspicious rentals. One lead pointed to 5 Bahamian crewmen ready to ferry the loads. Another link tied cell data to Chinese nationals already staged for pickup. Suddenly, the Airbnb wasn't just a rental, it was a staging ground for international crime. The question hangs heavy. How many other ordinary homes across America mask the machinery of smuggling, hiding pipelines that stretch far beyond what a single bust can reveal? 3 boats waited in the shadows, their engines silent, their paths mapped with precision. On the shore, lookouts scanned the horizon, ready to signal if patrol lights cut across the waves. The Airbnb in Fort Pierce, once just a rental, had become a command post. To outsiders, it looked like tourists enjoying Florida's Sunday. In reality, it was a staging hub for a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. Each passenger from China was charged up to $35,000 for the journey. Families mortgaged futures for a promise of entry. But this wasn't just human smuggling. Hidden among the bodies, sealed in plastic and wrapped in tarps, lay 370 pounds of cocaine. A dual cargo. People and narcotics moved like commodities in a global trade. The scheme relied on camouflage, legal services, Airbnb rentals, boat charters, money transfers were used as cover until the final moment. Investigators say this model treated crime like business, profit margins, logistics, supply chains. But instead of goods, the pipeline carried flesh and poison. If an international cartel can blend so easily into everyday commerce, turning rental homes into hubs and tourist boats into trafficking vessels, how many other businesses hide the machinery of smuggling in plain sight? 5:30 a.m., Fort Pierce Inlet. The sky was still dark, the tide pushing against the jetties when the boats made their move. 3 vessels cut through the water, their silhouettes barely visible. What the crews didn't know, federal and local agents were already in place, waiting. For weeks they had tracked the Airbnb, the marina visits, the cell phone chatter. Now at dawn, the trap closed. The first 2 boats never made it far. Interdiction teams swarmed, flashing lights piercing the gray morning. Officers boarded quickly, weapons drawn, commands shouted in English and Spanish. Within minutes, dozens of passengers sat on the deck, hands raised, fear etched on their faces. 30 Chinese nationals pulled from the cramped holes, 5 Bahamian crewmen restrained on the spot. Beneath tarps, agents uncovered the real price: 370 pounds of cocaine, brick after brick, each wrapped tight, worth millions on the street. But one vessel tried to slip away. Its captain veered hard toward open water, testing whether the net had a hole. It didn't. Patrol boats surged in, cutting off the escape. The chase was short, decisive, a reminder that the smugglers had backup plans, but so did law enforcement. Among the detainees, agents discovered 2 children. Their presence stripped away any illusion that this was just business. It was exploitation, ruthless and calculated. Mixing narcotics with human lives, the bust was hailed as a joint success. ICE, Homeland Security, and the St. Lucie Sheriff's Office working hand in hand. Yet the images linger. Dawn raids, terrified faces, children caught in a game of profit and power. And the question remains, if this was only one pipeline stopped, how many more are still running silently beneath America's horizon?
The detainees were escorted off the boats one by one, their faces illuminated by floodlights that cut across the morning haze. Shackles clicked into place, plastic evidence bags filled quickly with passports, cell phones, wads of cash, and small notebooks scribbled in Mandarin. The sheriff's office bussed the detainees to a temporary holding facility where ICE agents began sorting them by category: smugglers, passengers, minors, possible victims of trafficking. Each person carried a story, but layered on top of those stories was a criminal structure built to profit at every step. Investigators learned that the Chinese migrants had traveled first to the Bahamas, guided by intermediaries promising safe passage. There, they were staged in safe houses controlled by Bahamian handlers. Smuggling crews coordinated pickups with precision, waiting for windows when patrols were thin or weather could cover movement. Then, under cover of night, they were pushed toward Florida's coast, blending human movement with narcotics to maximize every trip. For the cartels, every crossing was a ledger entry, every life and every brick of cocaine a number on the balance sheet. Authorities revealed that each migrant paid between $25,000 and $35,000 for the journey. For 30 migrants, that's nearly $1 million in revenue, not counting the street value of the 370 pounds of cocaine. Multiply that by dozens of trips over a year, and the scale of the enterprise becomes staggering. This was not an isolated act of desperation. This was a high-volume industry, one that blurred the line between human smuggling and drug trafficking until both became inseparable. Task force commanders admitted privately that this case forced them to rethink their assumptions. Traditionally, agencies pursued narcotics and human smuggling on separate tracks, different divisions, different investigative lenses. But here, the cartels fused them together, turning one crime into camouflage for the other. Migrants masked the drugs justified the security. Together, they built a smokescreen almost strong enough to slip through unnoticed. Almost. Back at the Fort Pierce Airbnb, evidence teams swept through the rooms. Beds unmade, cheap luggage stacked in corners, receipts from convenience stores scattered across countertops. But what stood out most were the electronics. Dozens of prepaid cell phones, GPS devices, SIM cards from multiple countries, digital breadcrumbs leading from Florida to Nassau to Guangzhou, each phone a node, each number a connection, piecing together the spiderweb of contacts that sustained the network. Sheriff Ken Mascara of St. Lucie County called it a wake-up call at the press conference. Standing before microphones, he described the operation as one of the largest joint smuggling disruptions in Florida in over a decade. ICE officials echoed his warning. This was not an isolated cell, but part of a larger network capable of adapting, shifting, and re-emerging with frightening speed. "We stopped 3 boats today," one official said, "but how many boats sailed last month without being seen?" Inside federal headquarters, analysts traced the financials. Wire transfers from Asia filtered through shell companies in the Caribbean, disguised as shipping payments or real estate deposits. Airbnb rentals paid for in cash through intermediaries. Bank accounts drained and closed before investigators could even issue subpoenas. It was financial smoke and mirrors, an economy designed to stay 2 steps ahead of regulators. Every transaction was disposable, designed to vanish before suspicion could catch up. For the Chinese migrants, the pipeline promised entry into the United States, a new life, jobs, safety, a chance for something beyond the reach of China's tightening grip. But the cost was brutal. Families borrowed, sold property, or fell into debt to traffickers who demanded payment in advance. The smugglers didn't care about futures. Once aboard, every passenger was expendable, a risk factored into the price. Survivors would owe their lives not to the smugglers, but to luck and timing. And still, they came. Because the demand was relentless, because desperation outweighs fear, because the United States remains a beacon, bright enough to risk everything for a glimpse. Cartels know this. They profit from it, wrapping human dreams around bricks of cocaine, feeding both into the bloodstream of American cities. The bust shook Fort Pierce, but beyond the town, the ripple spread wider. Federal alerts went out to ports across Florida, from Miami to Jacksonville, warning that similar operations could already be in motion. Coast Guard cutters ramped up patrols, immigration courts braced for an influx of new cases, and narcotics divisions recalibrated their models, forced to consider that every human smuggling route may now double as a drug route too. Even inside Washington, the operation stirred debate. Lawmakers demanded answers. How did 30 migrants, 5 Bahamian crewmen, and nearly 400 pounds of cocaine slip within sight of Florida's coast before being stopped? What intelligence gaps allowed it to happen? Was this proof of resilience in the system or evidence of cracks growing wider? Behind closed doors, security officials admitted it was both. They had stopped one load, but the system remains porous, the adversaries innovative, the fight far from over. By the end of the week, nearly 300 arrests had been tallied across connected investigations, not just in Fort Pierce, but in neighboring counties and Bahamian safe houses raided by local police working with U.S. partners. Coordinated stings disrupted the support network: drivers, money couriers, document forgers, and boat suppliers. Still, investigators warned that many key players remained out of reach, operating overseas where U.S. warrants hold little weight. The true magnitude of the operation revealed itself not only in the arrests or seizures, but in the blueprint uncovered, a system designed to exploit Airbnb rentals, tourist marinas, and everyday financial tools. It was smuggling disguised as normal life, crime woven seamlessly into ordinary communities. The question that now haunts Florida is how many more pipelines are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the next night, the next crossing, the next shipment.
As the days unfolded, details of the arrests began spilling into public view. Local reporters captured footage of detainees being transferred in chains, escorted by heavily armed agents wearing tactical vests marked with ICE and Homeland Security. Rows of unmarked buses pulled up to processing centers, their tinted windows shielding the faces inside. Federal officials released carefully worded statements emphasizing the scale of the operation, but behind the podiums, agents admitted the truth. This was only one strand of a much larger web. Court documents painted a clearer picture. The Bahamian crewmen, some with prior smuggling arrests, admitted to being recruited specifically for their knowledge of the waters. They were paid cash up front, with bonuses promised upon successful delivery of both migrants and narcotics. Testimony revealed coded phone calls, burner phones switched after every trip, and instructions delivered through encrypted apps. The Chinese passengers, many from rural provinces, described a journey that began months earlier, moving from safe house to safe house across Asia before reaching the Bahamas. Their stories carried a familiar refrain: promises of opportunity, lies about safety, silence about the risks. Agents discovered that the organization had contingency routes mapped. If Fort Pierce failed, the boats could land further north near Melbourne or south near Jupiter, blending into recreational traffic. If interdicted at sea, smugglers were told to dump the narcotics and claim ignorance, framing the migrants as lost travelers. The sophistication of the playbook unsettled even veteran investigators. This wasn't improvisation, it was choreography, rehearsed and perfected over time. Meanwhile, evidence recovered from the Airbnb pointed to an international command chain. WhatsApp logs revealed instructions coming from overseas coordinators who tracked every detail: which boat left when, which safe house hosted which group, how payments were funneled through layered bank accounts. Investigators noted that none of the top-level organizers were anywhere near Fort Pierce. They orchestrated everything remotely, sacrificing local operators who could be easily replaced. For every arrest in Florida, there were decision-makers in the Bahamas, in Hong Kong, in Guangzhou, already planning the next move. The cocaine itself told its own story. Forensic analysis traced chemical markers back to South American labs, suggesting that the drugs had traveled through multiple continents before arriving in Florida waters. Combined with Chinese human cargo, the pattern revealed a global syndicate capable of merging supply chains across hemispheres. A single bust in Fort Pierce reflected a system that stretched from jungle labs to Asian suburbs, stitched together by greed and desperation. At the St. Lucie County Jail, detainees filled holding cells beyond capacity. Processing teams worked around the clock, fingerprinting, photographing, entering names into federal databases. Translators were rushed in, attempting to communicate with the migrants, many of whom spoke only dialects not easily understood even by Mandarin interpreters. The children were separated under federal guidelines and placed into protective custody, their future uncertain, their journey abruptly severed in a country they barely knew. The arrests reverberated into local communities. Residents of Fort Pierce, who had once considered the Airbnb just another short-term rental, were stunned. Parents walked their children past the street with unease. Neighbors whispered about whether other houses concealed the same hidden operations. Florida's coastline, already known as porous, now felt like a battlefield where normal life intersected with global crime. Sheriff Mascara reminded residents that vigilance was essential. He said at a town hall, "These houses don't advertise themselves as smuggling hubs. They look like your neighbor's rental. They blend in. But if something feels off, unusual traffic, strangers coming and going at odd hours, we need to know, because behind those walls could be more than just vacationers." The drugs seized, 370 pounds of cocaine, were trucked under heavy guard to a federal evidence facility. Agents held up the bricks at a press briefing, their wrappings stamped with symbols and numbers, coded markings used by cartels to identify shipments. Street value estimates soared into the millions. That's poison. That's thousands of lives destroyed if it reached the streets, one agent told reporters. But for every brick seized, thousands more circulate. Officials acknowledged that the bust, while significant, represented only a fraction of the total flow. Florida has long been a favored entry point, its waterways offering smugglers both opportunity and cover. Each seizure is a victory, but one measured against a tide that never stops rising. Beyond the arrests and seizures, investigators pursued the financial underbelly. Shell companies registered in Nassau tied to property deals in Hong Kong. Cash couriers moving across Caribbean islands with suitcases full of currency. Bitcoin wallets opened and closed within days, designed to move funds with no trail. Each layer added distance between the migrants' payments and the cartel bosses collecting them. Each layer also made prosecution harder, evidence weaker, accountability murkier. Federal officials warned that this was not a cartel dismantled, but a cartel disrupted. The smuggling channel had been fractured.